No role plays, just real. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader.
We've never really, as a workforce, spent a lot of time on making sure we're developing good leaders.
We'll be able to share stories, experience, mistakes, failures, successes.
This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Welcome to Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Chris.
And I'm Lorenzo.
And Lorenzo, on this episode, I want to talk about an article that I saw. I read up on the magazine that is published by the university, the MIT. Their Sloan Management School puts out a magazine on management and leadership. And an article that they published about a week and a half ago is called "Toxic Culture is Driving the Great Resignation." And I thought that's interesting. You know, usually from this source, I don't see a lot of clickbaity titles. They're pretty spot on in terms of what the title implies and what you're going to see in the article. And so I decided to read it, and it was completely eye-opening, and it told me a lot of things that I'm actually really surprised about. And I want to read you a stat here, and then I want to talk about it a little bit. It said that this management review company, they analyzed 34 million online employee profiles in a 6-month period between April and September of 2021 to look for why people left for any reason, including quitting, retiring, or being laid off. And the number one reason people are leaving a job is because of toxic culture at the job. Now, obviously, toxic culture is subjective, right? You can define it however you want to. But the fact that people are saying that is a big deal. Like, would you have guessed that was the number one reason people are leaving jobs?
Yeah, for those listening, this is my shocked face, and my shocked face is I'm not shocked. No, not at all. Absolutely not. No, I mean, so much of what we've talked about in the podcast for the last 4 years is that people leave leaders or people leave managers and not necessarily companies. Right. And by default, that means they leave the way that they're being treated. Good, bad, whatever the case is. And so, no, like toxic environments. And again, to your point, however you define those for yourself, I think there are definitely terms and definitions and things that we could say like this would be a toxic environment. But again, how people feel in those spaces, and them saying that on a survey really, I think, underlines what we have been talking about, which is this continuing level of a different expectation of leadership, of leaders becoming more empathetic, of just getting away from some of these old, antiquated, thoughts of leadership and thoughts of you have to work for the same company for all these years, like all these things that we're evolving away from, I think really speak to the fact that that's the number one thing, because how people get treated at work is the number one thing when it comes to their decision to either stay or to go.
Yeah, you're so right on that. I think the interesting part about this is that when people leave a toxic culture, some people, I'm sure, if you listen to them say what that meant to them, somebody might say, yeah, I left. It was a toxic culture. What do you mean by that? Well, I'd been with the company 3 whole months and hadn't been promoted yet. I was not offered a raise. It's like, like that. Maybe your expectations were a little too high. But if enough people have unrealistic expectations to the point where it is creating a great resignation, like whatever that is, even if they're unrealistic, it doesn't matter. The majority rules, right? If the power has clearly transferred from the employer to the employee, and the pandemic has hastened that. It was already happening anyway. It was what it was, and that's a good thing. The idea of a free market when it comes to an employer and employee relationship, it has to assume that both people are there of their own free will. You shouldn't have to feel like you are being held hostage by your employees and that they can get away with murder because you have no choice because you can't find anybody. That's where we're headed right now, because the pendulum always swings, wide both ways before it finds its happy medium. But it's also not healthy if the environment is such where employees feel like, I can't leave this place because I can't find another job, because that's when they stop really trying as hard, because they feel they feel like they are trapped by their employer. And neither is good. When you have a healthy relationship and you have people who are, if the employers feel like, I can find enough people to fill the roles here, my offering is solid enough where I can get the right people. And if the employee says, hey, you know what, the job market is such where I'm here because I want to be here, but that's the reason I'm here, is because I want to be here, and I could leave if I wanted to. That is when you have like this symbiosis that works really, really well, and it's really tough to find. We've not had that very many times in the Western workforce, but when we do have it, it's amazing what it does to the economy. Right now, we're swinging from one direction to the other, and we will find our medium again, but right now, the power definitely lies with the employee.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, a couple of episodes back, I had a conversation with Anna Liebel about just joy and joy in the workforce and finding joy and the importance of in life personally having joy and it being in a good place for yourself, because then I think when you're at work or at a job where you can like a job or you can enjoy the work maybe, or it's like this is the career that you've chosen, but being able to feel kind of like understand how you feel when going to work, I think also matters, and how maybe you project or how you take in how you're treated at work. I think that's something that she and I talked a little bit about on the surface level, and I know we're going to have a lot more conversations about this, because I think that there's also this element of the grass is greener somewhere else.
Sure,
and I think that that's one of those things right now. To your point, that the workforce can look and see and be like, the grass is greener somewhere else, and I'm going to make this decision, and I'm going to follow, this other job or go do this other thing, or like I don't like this part of the job maybe, or I feel that like having to do this kind of work, I don't like it, or I'm not happy about it anymore, or it's monotonous or whatever, and then I'm going to go in to do something else. And I think that that's also going to be something that we're going to see in the next probably 5 to 10 years, is people's understanding and realization that you're going to have parts of a job as you build your career, whether it's at the beginning or even the job responsibilities, that might not bring you a lot of joy, but based upon how much of a percentage of your day that may be something that you can kind of work through or deal with. And over time, you can start to, I don't know, I think not necessarily accept it, but just be able to move on to find the joys in the other parts of the job and the role. Because, like I said, we talk about all the time. As a leader and in the people business, and I've been in the retail industry, I can write you a laundry list of all the things that have frustrated me, that I have to deal with on a daily basis potentially, that, people and attitudes and situations and customers, and like there's always something there that would give me a reason to feel that I could be upset, or I could take it home, or I could be frustrated, whatever the case is. But by defining joy as helping others exceed their own expectations, helping others to set their own goals and exceed their goals, and to find joy in watching others grow personally and professionally, and do great work and get rewarded for that great work, I get to see that every single day. And I get to see that in my experience, which is the joy that fills my bucket, so that as I come across these other things that may be frustrating, or that may be a short stint, or you may have to work with somebody. I've had to work with people in my career that I'm like, I really don't enjoy working with or for this person.
Right.
And it's no fun in the middle of that. And it's not, it's not a good time. But I've also, in my experience, that has helped to shape me and solidify who I am as a leader, and remembering how I felt in those spaces. How can I help others to not create those spaces? And it's never perfect, but I just think that when you start to think about why people leave for toxic environments, there's a lot to unpack there that we're going to have to work together with, with people and with other leaders and with listeners. Like, we all have to figure out what this looks like and what we expect when we go to work, and where we put our foot down and say, we're not going to accept that, but we will understand that there's going to be frustrations at work.
You're making me think of something that I heard a while ago, a long time ago. I've been married 14 years, and I remember being told by somebody during like a marriage counseling thing that I went through before I got married, through the church that we go to. And one of the things that we heard is that one of the reasons that the divorce rate is so much higher now than it was before is because people have an unrealistic expectation of what it means to be married and how much joy there should be. Meaning, at sometimes you are not going to have the same level of attraction and passion and newness with your spouse that you had when you first started dating. That's just how it works. And when the tide, wanes and, goes back and forth on this, the decision to leave because it isn't going the way you thought it was going to go, when your expectation is so high and you realize that you're not meeting that expectation, if that makes you want to cut bait, then that's why you would leave a relationship versus continue on with it versus, making an effort, trying to get through it for longer. Now, do you try and make it work and try to get through it while your spouse is beating you? No, but that's what you're talking about here. Like there's the line at which you have to make a decision as to like what will I tolerate and what won't I tolerate. And the only thing that can give you that is context, and context from other people, your coworkers, your job history that you've had. And so if an employee were to say, I left because of a toxic culture, oh, what did you mean by that? Well, can you believe that they didn't come and pick me up at my house to bring me to work? I had to drive there,
Mm-hmm.
You'd say, well, that's ridiculous. Well, is it? It's ridiculous to you and I because we've always had to drive to work. But what if their very first job was they were recruited into Silicon Valley and told that they were the best programmer in the world, and Google sent a bus around all the employees and picked them up, and they worked on the bus in their laptop on the clock, driving to work with mobile Wi-Fi, and now all of a sudden they're working for they're applying for another job, and that isn't offered, and to them that's toxic to expect employees to drive themselves to work, right? So it's all context, and it's all based on what you know and what your expectation is. But good leaders can create the relationship with their people that gives them the right to lend context and advice and life experience that will help the employees have a better grasp around what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, what they should expect when they're in the workforce versus what they shouldn't expect, the things that they should tolerate and the things that they won't tolerate. And yeah, if you're working a 40-hour-a-week job and your expectation is that all 40 hours will bring you the highest level of joy, that there are very, very few careers that have that for people. Very few. And if you can find one, that's great. Don't ever leave. If you're in a job where of your 40 hours a week, 2 hours of that 40 bring you joy and the rest don't, you are also in the wrong place. There has to be that balance, and what number of hours of the 40 per week that you can average into the things that really bring you joy, what level is required of you is only something you can determine. But your leaders should be able to help you have a good grasp of what should be expected. And when leaders can't do that, people have the unrealistic expectations and they leave for the toxic environment.
Yeah, and I would underline this, and I love the context and kind of some of the examples, because you're right, it's very subjective in regards to what that is. But here's also what the data will tell us outside of the survey, that a lot of people are dealing with that. A lot of people are actually in toxic environments. There are leaders in organizations that treat them like crap, that don't care about them, that prioritize things beyond the person. They become just an employee, just the next employee. They don't treat them with respect. Like there's a lot of that also happens quite often.
Oh yeah.
And I think that working through those things, and also I think it's important to delineate between like a toxic leader and a bad leader. Because I think that toxic leaders are bad leaders, but bad leaders are not necessarily toxic. And we've talked about this before.
Incompetence doesn't necessarily mean, malice.
Correct. I can have a bad leader because they're new to the role, or they're figuring things out. They're making some mistakes. Their approachability is not great, but they have no ill intent. They care about how people feel, and they're doing what they think is right, and they're doing it in spaces where it can maybe come across the wrong way, or it was the wrong decision, or they were misinformed on a policy or procedure. And people can say that's a bad leader, right? Again, doesn't make them a bad person, but they're not leading this team to the expectation of what we'd want to see out of a leader in a role. Then there's a toxic leader, somebody who is self-absorbed and could care less how people feel, and it's just them, and they don't care about feelings, and they don't have any empathy, and they're just trying to get people to do what they need them to do, and it's just another person, just and those exist. Those definitely exist out there, and people may be in that space right now. But I love what you said around like the self-awareness and understanding of like if you are in a toxic relationship or if you're in a toxic work environment, the answer is leave. The answer is get out. And I'm not saying that that's easy, and I'm not saying that you're not going to need help or support or that type of thing. But talk to someone. If you're in a job where you're feeling that way, don't just talk to those that you work with. Talk to other people and mentors and friends and family members that don't work at that same spot. They work somewhere else. Right. And ask them about this is what's going on here. Because to your point, that perspective might be, well, wait a minute. Okay, you feel that you shouldn't work there because they won't pick you up. Okay, I understand for sure that was a part of the last job or that was a part of a benefit they provided. But like, does that take away the joy that you have in the work?
Right.
Like I know it might be an inconvenience. I know that might have to make, like, I get all of that, but like, is that what you're saying? Is this thing such a priority to you that that's the number one objective or number two objective of where you're going to work? Well, then I would suggest maybe go find the companies that still do that or that offer that level of service, and then it is what it is. And maybe if you are in a role where you're an individual contributor, where your job is to like just get the work done, and these little things like this are such an important part of how you're able to get your job done and have the time that you want to have for your life. I get it. Like I said, I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just saying that maybe seek some other counsel where people can provide you with some perspectives that may be helpful in defining and saying, absolutely, Chris, you need to get out of there. That's not healthy for you, and that's ridiculous, and I would never let somebody talk to me like that or do that type of thing. You need to get out of there. Or somebody could say, hey, Chris, let's talk a little bit more about this. Like, let me give you some of my perspective from another place or another, my experience that may be helpful in thinking about the perspective that you have in the workplace.
I completely agree. And with that, it brings us to this episode's 1 Minute Hack. But first, a few words from our sponsors.
The 1 Minute Hack.
Okay, so for this episode's 1 Minute Hack, here's what I'd like for you to do. Get out your pen and paper, and on the left side, I want you to write down a couple of terms. Disrespect, unethical behavior, abusive managers, and cutthroat environment. I want you to write those down, a list on the left. On the right-hand side, I want you to write down examples of these things, how you see them, if they exist in your work environment. And again, if you want to test to see, are you in a toxic environment? If I say these words and you say absolutely not, then I would not say that you're necessarily in a toxic environment, and you could be in a really good space, and that's perfectly fine. But it's always good to think about this because others may feel differently. If I say these words and you say, you just rattled off how I feel at work every day, then write down why you feel that way and what's going on. And then, as I said earlier in the episode, go seek some counsel. Go talk to somebody, a family member, a friend, somebody that you know and trust, somebody that is outside of your work environment, and say, I just want to go over this with you, and this is how I feel at work, and these are the reasons why I feel this way. And allow them to have dialogue with you around either absolute alignment, and this is unacceptable, and there are some things that you should do, including probably leave that place, or some dialogue around perspective and dialogue or debate around, what do they feel the same way or do they not feel the same way about these very particular things. But I think this is really good to do as a reminder to some of us, because sometimes you get lost in the work, and sometimes these things are happening and you never pause to think about it. And so this could be an opportunity for you to consider your work environment, what's going on, and then gain some perspective to really make sure that how you feel is reflective to how you're being treated, to be able to make the best decision possible for you and your career.
I love that 1 minute hack. And the reason I love it is because, I agree. There's if you are too close to something, then it becomes harder to judge it objectively, and getting somebody involved and having that conversation who you trust, but who doesn't have a dog in the fight and who can look at it from like a distance as opposed to being caught up in the moment. I think that's really, really important. I think one thing I want to add is that this data from this survey was consistent regardless of whether these were customer-facing or not non-public-facing jobs, blue-collar versus white-collar. It was exactly the same. So this isn't what we've talked about in previous episodes around a leader's responsibility to, kind of back up or stand up for their employees with regard to abusive customers. These things are happening, and these self-reporting of toxic environments are occurring at the same rate, even in jobs where the employees aren't treated poorly by customers. This is, am I treated poorly by my coworkers and by my leaders? And so you don't just dismiss this and say, well, the place that I work isn't one that deals with the customers or the public in general. There's no reason for me to consider that this might be an issue.
Absolutely. And with that, it brings us to the end of this episode. This is Hacking Your Leadership. I'm Lorenzo.
And I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you all next time.